First of all, I want to thank the Kashkins for giving me the opportunity to speak and inviting me. I hope everybody is still going to be on speaking terms with them after tonight. It's not to be taken for granted. So I was asked to speak about the topic of when should one listen to a rav, so-called das Torah, when should one, when do you have to, when don't you have to? The answer is very simple. If the rabbi has das Torah like me, then always, of course. So thanks for coming. Good night. No. Okay, so obviously not that simple. I think the question itself is tragic. The fact that many, and this is not blaming anybody, but the fact that so many people are confused by this issue. They're not even sure when do you have to listen to a rabbi, when are you allowed to ask questions, when are you allowed to seek multiple opinions, etc. The fact that we don't all know this, we're talking about, I think, almost everybody, if not everybody here, has gone through the Jewish day school system, seems to be from people, good kosher Jews, and yet, older than me, and yet you're not even sure when you have to speak to a rabbi, when you have to listen to a rabbi, that this is not something that we know from a very early age is a very strong indictment of our whole society and our whole system. Because the answer should be obvious to everybody. This is very basic. The fact that we don't even know shows that there's something very, very wrong with our whole society and our whole system. Again, I'm not blaming the victims, but there's a deeper problem here if this is something that people even have a question about. I'll further say, before getting to some Torah sources on the subject, I don't think anybody really deep down believes in an extreme interpretation of the term das Torah. First of all, the term das Torah, I don't know when it was first thrust into society, but it's not an ancient term. You won't find it anywhere in the Torah, in Shas. It doesn't exist. This is a very recent term, especially the extreme interpretation of das Torah, meaning the rabbi said, and therefore, case closed, I must do what he said on all matters, not just on a shaila, but on personal matters, all kinds of matters. The rabbi said, case closed. That extreme interpretation is very, very recent, and you won't find that anywhere in Shas. I can say that with total confidence. And nobody really believes that. The proof being, if you go to somebody who plays the das Torah card with you on any issue, you'll find very often they have a smartphone, they have internet. Well, doesn't das Torah say you're not allowed to have these things? Right? Do they smoke? Doesn't das Torah say that you're not allowed to smoke? Many of these people do. If they live in Chutz La'aretz, ask them a theoretical question. If the same rabbi that you're playing the das Torah card with said that you have to make aliyah, would they close their business, take their kids out of school, and move their family to Israel because the rabbi said so? Most likely not. Most likely they would say, well, I hold of a different rabbi, right? So people don't really deep down believe in das Torah, they're just playing that card. Do you know who does believe in extreme interpretation of das Torah? Naftali Bennett, strangely enough. Because when the fake psak in the name of Kanievsky came out, that supposedly he was in favor of the Shas, which is not true, I spoke a lot about it, but minutes later, Bennett went on his Twitter and he said, the Gadol Hadar has spoken, you must get your shots. Because he really cares what das Torah has to say. And in fact, that was the line of the media, with such respect and reverence. Rav Kanievsky, all the rabbis, all the great rabbis said, you have to take the shots. Of course we always listen to the rabbis. These are people who are shkutzin, they have nothing to do with the Torah. Nothing whatsoever. They have no respect for the rabbis. The same media is always slandering the rabbis, attacking the rabbis. When the rabbi can be useful for them, then suddenly, we have great reference for the rabbi. So this is the way das Torah is used. It's used to win an argument. It's used to beat people over the head and make them do something because the rabbi said. But nobody really believes in it. I don't think anybody really does. If they do, very, very small number of people, and they're inconsistent because nobody really follows what the rabbi does all the time. Nobody asks the rabbi about every little thing. They generally do what they want, or they'll shop around for a rabbi who tells them what they want to hear. So deep down, I think the whole concept of das Torah is really a sham. So the first thing that we have to do is look in the Shulchan Aruch for guidance on the das Torah, when do you have to listen to a rabbi issue. So would anybody like to guess between the four sections of Shulchan Aruch in which chelek, the section on when you have to listen to a rabbi, appears? Just take a guess. So Orach Chaim, there's Yoredea, Even Ezer, and Choshen Mishpat. Where do you think that the appropriate siman can be found? Just curious, because
none of the above.
What?
None of the above.
None of the above. You're a smart man. I was setting people up to be publicly embarrassed. So very good to say that. I wasn't going to embarrass anybody, but very good. It doesn't appear anywhere, which is shocking. Again, this is something that's so basic. You would think that the Shulchan Aruch would outline for us this very matter, right? When do you have to ask a shiloh? When do you have to listen? So on and so forth. Doesn't appear anywhere. So that means, first of all, it can't be the extreme interpretation. Right? The Torah covers everything, and we have to kind of read between the lines from other Torah sources to figure out. So right off the bat, this is not a black and white issue. The rabbi said, we must listen. So there's two places in the Torah where we are basically told that we must listen. That is to a Navi and to the Sanhedrin. That's what it says in the Torah. So regarding the Navi, we find really in terms of a Navi Sheker, the very fact that a Navi Sheker exists, and the Torah says we have to execute a Navi Sheker, and tells us how we know who a Navi Sheker is, immediately tells us that we don't necessarily accept an extreme interpretation of Das Torah. Because in order for a person to be a Navi Emes, or even a Navi Sheker, he has to be an extremely exalted person. It's not just any random person comes in and says, God spoke to me. In Judaism, the Rambam says for a person to qualify as a Navi, he first has to be a big tzaddik, a chassid, a talmid chacham, very pious, really an exceptional person. And then when he gives you a prophecy, and then you can check out the prophecy to see if it fits, if it's reasonable that this person is a Navi. But he has to check off a lot of boxes to even qualify as being a Navi. And if we sense that he's a Navi Sheker, we don't listen to him. And in fact, if it's clear that he's a Navi Sheker, we execute him. So right off the bat, we are expected to think for ourselves, to cross-examine somebody who's giving us the so-called word of Hashem, to cross-examine that person. So we can't say that we're ever just blindly following anybody, because even a Navi, right, can be a Navi Sheker. Even a true Navi can go bad. Even somebody who has a track record of being a true Navi can then say something that, flashes those red signs and red flags that he's a Navi Sheker, and he would be executed. And these things have happened. What about the Sanhedrin? So the Torah says in Parashat Shoftim that we have to follow the Sanhedrin. This is one of the psukim that is often quoted by the Das Torah proponents, that we shouldn't veer to the right or to the left of what the judges say. And so I'll say, even if what seems right to you, they say is left, and vice versa, you must listen to it. Even if he says something that seems to make no sense whatsoever, you must listen because they have spoken. The other pasuk that they often quote is Acharei Rabbim lehatos. If most of the rabbis have spoken, or most of the great rabbis have spoken, you must listen. Case closed. Now the problem is that they don't tell you the first half of that very pasuk. Well, the second one in Shoftim we'll get to later on. But this first one about Acharei Rabbim lehatos. The complete pasuk says, Lo sia acharei rabbim lira'os. Do not follow the majority to do evil. We don't always follow the majority. We only follow the majority when they're correct. V'lo sane al riv lintos acharei rabbim lahatos. So basically saying, when do we follow the rov? We don't follow the rov. But most of the world is not Jewish. So do we follow the rov? Most Jews are not from. Do we follow the rov? Obviously not. So we only follow the rov when they have a valid opinion. And we have to do something. So when you have, let's say, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and that's not the best example because you say, generally speaking, we don't follow Beis Shammai at all, that doesn't even count as a Mishnah. But just for purposes of an example, Beis Shammai is certainly a valid Torah authority, and Beis Hillel is a valid Torah authority, and we can't do both. So who do we follow? So we would take it for a vote, right? And then whoever wins the vote, that's how we follow. Because practically speaking, we have to have one Torah and all do one thing, so we follow the rov of a valid opinion. But let's say we have a room with 50 Christians and 10 Jews. We don't say the 50 Christians are right. We don't follow the rov because that's not a valid opinion. That doesn't count at all. So it has to be a valid opinion, and where there's a stalemate, where they're both giving their proofs back and forth, and ultimately it has to go to a vote. So that's when we follow the rov. So we don't follow the rov lira'os, to do evil or to do the wrong thing. It has to be acharei rabbim lahatos, when you have to turn the judgment one way or the other, because both opinions are correct. There is shivim pan and l'torah. They're both valid opinions. They went through the process properly. They both have valid Torah arguments, but bottom line, we have to do one thing, so then we follow the rov. Perfect example from the Torah, the spies, right? There were 12 spies, 10 of them were bad, and 2 of them were good, and all of them were very righteous people. They were, at least at the outset, they were righteous people, they were leaders, they had an excellent track record. It was 10 against 2. Not only were we not supposed to follow the rov, the Jews were punished for following the rov, because they should have known better. They couldn't say, well, I'm just following most of the great rabbis are saying that we shouldn't go to Israel, that we should be scared to fight. I'm just listening to my rabbi. The Jews got punished. They paid with everything. They lost everything because they listened to the rov of great rabbis. Okay, the Gemara in Horius, and also in Parshas Vayikra, and I wrote one of my articles about this, deals with the case of a Sanhedrin getting it wrong. Now, the Sanhedrin is the greatest of the Batei Din, right? Because we have the lower courts, and the middle courts, and the higher courts. The Sanhedrin is the highest court. They're the highest authority. What happens if they paskin that a mitzvah from the Torah is not really a mitzvah, you don't have to do it? Or even if a part of Avodah Zarah is mutter, that this type of idolatry is not allowed, but this type of idolatry is allowed. So they're canceling part of a mitzvah or a total mitzvah, and in some cases they have to bring a korban. When they realize that they were wrong and they do tshuva, they have to bring a korban, and sometimes the person himself who sinned by listening to the court is the one who's guilty and has to bring the korban. So you can see there for the varying details, but the bottom line is that we see that the Torah is teaching us about the possibility of the very greatest rabbis, the Sanhedrin, getting it so wrong that they have to bring a korban for idolatry, for encouraging the people to serve idolatry, that possibility even exists. that the Torah talks about this. They're not talking about wicked people, they're talking about presumably righteous people who are getting it so seriously wrong about canceling a mitzvah that any school child can open up the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot and see that this is a mitzvah, right? And it's right there, and it's saying, well, this mitzvah doesn't apply in this case, or even if it's idolatry, and they're wrong. So that possibility exists. So what does that tell you? We have an obligation to not blindly trust even the Sanhedrin. And in fact, in many cases, if everybody's following the Sanhedrin, but you know better, you're also a learned person, and you know that they're wrong, you're not allowed to listen to the Sanhedrin. And if you do, you have to bring the carbon. You have to bring the carbon. You're guilty. You can't get off the hook by saying, I was just following them, I was following the orders, these are the greatest rabbis, they know better than me. And they said right is left and left is right, so I'm listening to them. So we have to explain what the right-left thing is later on, but you see, again, very, very clearly that even the greatest rabbis can get it wrong, do get it wrong, and must be challenged by people, and people who know better, even if they're not as knowledgeable as the rabbis, but if they know in this particular case the rabbi is wrong, they're not allowed to listen, and they're punished if they do. Okay, so, when it comes to psak, okay, we're not going to a Sanhedrin, most times we're going to a psak, we're not even going to a Beis Din, you're going to a Rav, a rabbi. So when do you have to listen to the Rav? So let's see Gemara in Bava Basra, 130b, that is Kuf Lamed Amud Bet. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa, Ein Lameidin Halacha, we do not learn a halacha, Lo Mipi Talmud, not from a student, V'lo Mipi Maisa, not from an action, meaning if you see the rabbi taking a certain action, you can't just say, well, he's doing it, it must be okay. Okay, V'lo Mipi Maisa, Achi Yomer Lo Halacha L'Maisa, until the rabbi tells you, Halacha L'Maisa, this is practical halacha. Now this is a key word, because halacha and halacha l'maisa are two different things. Halacha means people are arguing in the Beis Medrash or talking Torah, going back and forth, say this is the halacha. So you have halacha in the Beis Medrash, and then you have halacha in the real world. They're not always the same thing. Sometimes you can paskin something and argue very heatedly in the Beis Medrash. When somebody asks you a shaila in real life, you wouldn't actually do that in real life. There's many cases like that. So the rabbi has to tell you, this is practical halacha, this is what you must do, not just theory halacha. So, Shov Amar Lo halacha l'maisa, if you ask a shaila, again, key word, you're asking him the shaila, he's not imposing on you. Okay, a rabbi doesn't have the right to knock on your door and say, I am giving you a verdict, you must do something. You have to ask him the shaila first. You are granting him the authority to paskin for you, and he tells you, halacha l'maisa, this is what you must do. Yelech v'yasa maisa. Then you should go and take that action. Uvilvad shelo yidame. On the condition that you do not compare. Make a comparison from one case to another. Meaning, the rabbi paskins for you, you ask him a shaila in this particular case, and he says, this is what you must do. Okay, then you have to listen to the rabbi. Again, not always, as we'll see, but generally speaking, that's a psak that you got, so you must follow. But you cannot conclude, based on that psak, anything else. You can't compare. Well, he said in this case is very similar, therefore, the same halacha applies. Every case could have variables, and they might change the actual law. So then the Gemara asks, why ubulvad shoydan? What does it mean that you don't compare one case to another? But kol Torah kula dimuyim edamim. The whole Torah is comparisons. How does the rabbi make the psak in the first place? Right? When we have something novel, something new, how does the rabbi know what the halacha is and make his psak? Because he's comparing previous laws, previous cases. This looks very similar. This is the right comparison. This is the wrong comparison. He has to figure out the right comparison to make. So what do you mean that you can't make a comparison? That's how psak happens. So Amar Rav Ashi said, Hachi Kamar, this is what it means to say, Ulavad Shulidama Betrefus. You don't make a comparison in laws of Trefus. Tanya, as we learned, Ain Omrim Betrefus, Zu Domalazu, when it comes to Trefus. This animal is kosher, this animal is treif. You don't say this is similar, this law is similar to this. Why? Va'al tisma, and don't be astonished by this. Shari chol mikan umeisa, chol mikan v'chaytza. Because you can cut an animal in one place and it'll live, and cut an animal in a different place and it'll die. Right? And it's not always logical. I might think that this is a lethal place to cut the animal, and it turns out it's not so lethal. In a different part of the body, it might actually be lethal. So you can't draw a comparison in treifus. Okay, it's not a logical thing, and as we'll see soon, it's not limited only to treifus, but it does connect to the vaccine issue or medicine or anything like that. You can't postulate for all people. Everybody's got to take an injection of anything. Because every body is different, everybody's personal case is different, everybody's medical history is different, and you can't say that the vaccine is safe and effective for everybody, or any particular group of people. Every person has to ask an individual shaila. I think for this vaccine, of course, nobody should take it, but in theory, about any drug or any treatment, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. A rabbi, by definition, cannot paskin that everybody must take a certain treatment. There's no such thing, as you see from here, because this is an issue of treifus, because you can inject one person and it'll live, and another person will die. It doesn't work like that. Okay? So the Gemara continues. Amar lei Rav Asi Rav Yochanan. Rav Asi said to Rav Yochanan, Ki Amar lan mar halacha. When you, the master, Rav Yochanan, tell us the halacha, heichi navid. What should we do? Heichi navid ma'aser. Okay? How should we do the ma'aser? What action should we take? So Amar, he said, Lo tabidu, you should not do anything. Ad amina halacha l'ma'aser. So far, until I tell you halacha l'ma'aser.
Amar Lu Rabba Rav Papa Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua. So Rabba said to Rav Papa and Rav Huna the son of Rav Yeshua. This is very interesting here. Asi Piska Dedina Didi Lekamaychu. When a psak halacha from me comes before you, when I pass in a shaila and now you learn of this psak, v'chazisu be'pircha, and you see that there's a problem with my psak. You see that there's a question. This is what he's telling his students. You see that there's something questionable about my psak. Lo tikra'uhu, you should not tear it up. Ad atisu lekamai, until you come before me. Meaning, I might have had a havamina. The Rebbe gives you a psak and it makes no sense. Just tear it right up. He says, no, don't tear it right up. Come to me first. If I have a reason to justify my position, I'll tell you. Right? Ask me your question, ask me your problem, tell me the problem that you have, and if I can justify it, I'll justify it. Give me the benefit of the doubt. Give me at least a chance to justify my psak. Now, when the Das Torah proponents don't even entertain the possibility, right? They say the rabbi says, of course you do it. Here the Gemara is saying the other thing, that it's more likely than not that you would tear it up, but at least give him a chance to justify the psak. It doesn't seem to make sense. Come to him first and ask him, V'ilo, and if I don't have a justification, hadar nabi, then I will retract my psak. I will accept your challenge. If I can't justify it, I will retract my psak. La'achar misa, let's say it's after I die, and now you have a record of my psak. Lo mikra tikra'u, then you should not tear. So you don't have the opportunity anymore to ask me why I said what I said. So don't tear it up. Umigmar nami lo tikru minei, but you also should not learn from it. Lo mikra tikra'une, you shouldn't tear it up. Dihavai hasam, because if I was there, dilma havaminu chutama, maybe I would have been able to give you a reason to justify it. So don't tear up my psak. But migmar nami lo tikru minei, but you also should not learn from it. The ain ledayin elamashain avros, because a judge can only paskin based on what his eyes see. And if you have a problematic psak, it doesn't make any sense. You can't follow it. So don't tear it up. Keep it at least on the record, because it could be further studied. Right? Maybe at some point somebody will be able to explain it. Don't tear it up, but certainly don't follow it, because you as the judge, you can only do what is visible before you. You can't paskin according to something that doesn't make sense. Very powerful stuff. And there's a long me'iri here, which I'm not going to read. It's a little bit off the topic, so I won't read the whole thing, but I want to bring it to your attention. He says that this was a major problem in his times, that people were coming up with their own psaks, and they didn't understand the whole process of how things work. They'll find something in a sefer somewhere and say, I see it in the sefer, it says this and this, and they don't even realize that the person writing the sefer is not necessarily, even if it's a gadol, it says many times anybody can write a sefer, it doesn't mean that the person who wrote the sefer is necessarily somebody that you should follow. But even if it is, even if they stumble upon a real gadol, a real posek who wrote something in a sefer, it doesn't mean that you can necessarily apply it in practical terms. Maybe he was just theorizing about something, asking a question, giving an answer. It was just part of the Torah process, but he wasn't necessarily giving you a psak that you're able to follow. He says people are amateurs when it comes to this kind of thing, and it's everybody's doing their own thing, saying, the proof is I found some rabbi who said it. That's not how the process works. It's not how the process works. The Shita Mikubetzes on this Gemara elaborates a little further. He says, V'ilo hadranabi, so Rabbi said, if I don't have an answer for your challenge, I will retract my psak. Pirush, meaning to say, Davka hach pircha b'toa b'dvar mishnah. So this is meaning if the question is if the rabbi got something wrong in a matter of a mishnah, meaning how could you say this, Rava, when a mishnah says contrary, Rava is not allowed to argue with a mishnah, right? That there is a pecking order, and Rava is not allowed to argue with the mishnah, just like we today are not allowed to argue with the mishnah or the Gemara, right? So there's a certain pecking order here. Ha b'shikul hadas, but let's say it has nothing to do with a mishnah, but it's in terms of logic. Meaning he's weighing two different possibilities that both seem valid, and he, like we saw before, by following the road where his opinion doesn't have a major problem in terms of the Torah sources per se, but just in terms of his logic. Hakaimalan, so we hold kamdina. So then that didn't stand. If you go to a judge, if you go to a rab, and there are two possibilities, both seem valid and reasonable, but you need help picking between the two. Like let's say again, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, or something like that. Okay, or a minhag, should I do this minhag or that minhag? And both of them are valid, but you don't know what's the best thing for you, and you're asking him to help you figure out the best idea. So that's a matter of shikul hadas. Okay, so then that didn't withstand. The eino chozer, and then he should not take it back. Umedamrina la'achar misa lo mikra tikraune. When Rabbi said, after I die, you should not tear up my psak. Shema mino, we learn from here that filu ki haygavna, even in such a case, chayiv talmud b'kvodol shel rabbo, the student is still chayiv to honor his rebbe. Shelo yistor devara, but also din atzmo, that he should not go against the words of his rabbi in that particular din. Afal gav de medina choser, even though that in general he will go against the din. Meaning, umiyu davka imu pisko dahacha gufe. Okay, and meaning if it's only particular to this halacha. Avo imba maisa akar liyado. So meaning that let's say the rabbi ruled in a certain case, such and such, and then the rabbi dies, and the student is not allowed to overturn the judgment of the rabbi. But see, listen to what he says now. This is coupled for the rabbi, so you're not allowed to overturn the judgment. Let's say now the student is now the rabbi, the student is now the judge, and the same case is now coming before him. Even though it is exactly the same as the case that his rabbi judged. So we have a psak halacha on the books. The student thinks that this psak halacha is wrong, but out of kavod for his rabbi who is now dead, he cannot tear up the psak. And now the student is asked to judge in a case that is exactly the same. There are no variables here. It's exactly the same case. So you would think, okay, it's on the books. The rabbi passed it, the student has to follow it, right? So the student can judge according to what seems correct in his eyes. He can't overturn the previous judgment, because that's what the rabbi paskin, and the rabbi is now dead, so the student has to give honor to his rabbi. But now when he has literally the exact same case, he can ignore what the rabbi said and paskin according to what he thinks is right. The angel, the dain, and the masha'en of again, we see the dain can only judge according to what he thinks is right. Dain is not a mouthpiece for somebody else, certainly not for the health ministry or atheists or doctors. The rabbi has to judge according to what he thinks is right, which means, first of all, he has to think, and what he thinks is right. Okay? The Chen Kasav Hara'azal, Haranzal, so this is many poskim, all follow this approach. A student should not listen to the psak of the rabbi, even if it's literally the same case if he thinks it's wrong. Okay? Next comes from the Igros Moshe, from Moshe Feinstein. Yoredeya Chelik Gimel Simon Peches. I got this from an article of Abba Horowitz, a friend of mine. He appeared on my podcast a couple of times, so I took this source from his article. He gets credit for that. So Moshe Feinstein said very interesting comments about people asking about the possibility of living in Bnei Brak when they might not agree with all of the positions of the Chazon Ish, who was the posek of Bnei Brak. Of course, he was a massive posek for all the Jewish people, but especially in Bnei Brak, wherever he lived. So the minhag will typically follow him. So what about living there if you don't necessarily agree with all the rulings of the Chazon Ish? So Moshe Feinstein was asked about this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he writes as follows. Lo move on shum chashash b'zeh. I don't see any reason to be concerned about this. Va'adarav, on the contrary, zehu kvodo. This is the honor of the Chazon Ish. If you move into Bnei Brak and you have questions about his psak, you're giving honor to him. Asher mazkirim shitasim b'divrei Torah, that you are mentioning his shita in divrei Torah, uma'ayim midvarav, and you're studying his words. Even though the Chacham who's now moving into Bnei Brak, and he's concerned, he doesn't want to step on the toes of this massive posek, but this is kavod for the posek, that he's studying his Torah, he's looking into it, even if the conclusion of the Chacham is different than the words of the Chazon Ish. Below all a cloud of Dasa Chazon Ish Tzatzal, it never entered the mind of the Chazon Ish at all. That there would never be a Talmud Chacham who argued with him. The Chazon Ish never entertained the possibility that some other Chacham would never come along and have a different opinion. And it makes no sense that he would be upset about this. The Adarabah, just the opposite. That a Talmud Chacham loves the truth and peace, and you have to love arguing about Torah, and then learning, because you're arguing about the Torah, you delve into it further, and you get to a greater level of truth. The Indians have so and the matter, this concept of that the lips of the dead move in the grave when you're speaking their Torah applies even when you're mentioning his Torah and arguing with him. You're not just mentioning his Torah as a mouthpiece, but you're studying his Torah even if you draw a different conclusion that is still a kavod and a schus for the person who taught the Torah. Kol shekain v'kol shekain, says Rav Moshe Feinstein. How much? Even more so. That one should not be worried about asking questions and even arguing about the gedolim of our generation. Even the greatest of the gedolim, don't worry about it. You're allowed to question them. You're even allowed to differ with them. As long as, of course, you do it in a respectful way. But you were allowed and you were expected to question them. There's no such thing as Das Torah where you can't even question him. If he says something that doesn't make sense, you ask a question. Right? Just like if the doctor says something that doesn't seem to make sense, you ask a question. If anybody says something that doesn't make sense, you ask a question, you clarify, so you do it in a respectful way. But even the greatest of the Gedolim, you were allowed to question them and challenge them. Living or dead, you were allowed to think for yourself, and you're expected to. So would a true Gadol, see here's really the key question, would a true Gadol ever say to you, when he's giving you the psak, you are not allowed to question me? If you ask a shaila of a rav, the shaila is, Rebbe, am I allowed to ever question you? Could you imagine Rebbe saying, no, of course not. Of course you can't question me. I'm God. I'm a Navi. All right. And any rabbi who says that, I don't think would have many followers. Or let's say he gives you a psak. Would you say, Rabbi, am I allowed to ask you questions? You say, no, you're not allowed to ask me questions at all. How dare you ask me questions? I know what's wrong with you. Of course not. No Gadol would ever say such a thing. So if you believe in Das Torah, and every Gadol would of course say, of course you're allowed to question me, and then you go ahead and say, I'm not allowed to question you, so you're going against Das Torah, strangely enough, right? Unless you say he's so humble, really, he doesn't want you to question him. He's too humble, he doesn't think he's a gadol, so then you're speaking for him now. You're putting words in his mouth that he never said. You're making assumptions. So really, the whole idea of Das Torah is going against Das Torah, because no gadol would ever say, you're not allowed to question me. And if he does, he's not really a gadol. No gadol in our history has ever said, I know everything, you can't question me. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. We even see that this is the way Psak works, that you must question them, and if he's wrong, he will either take it back, and if he's not alive anymore, and you're a judge, you're not allowed to follow him. Okay, next source is very interesting. It comes from Ibn Ezer. I didn't find the Shulchan Aruch talking about this per se, but again, you find sources that kind of shed light on the topics. This is from Ibn Ezer, Simin Ayin Hey Seif Hey. At the very end, at 75:5 in the Piskei Tshuva, he talks about the halacha of a spouse forcing the other spouse to make aliyah. Right? If the husband or the wife is living in Chutz La'aretz, which I don't know why any Jew would want to do anymore, and they want to make aliyah, so they can, generally speaking, pick up and move, force the spouse to move. Otherwise, then the marriage can be terminated. Okay. So the Piskei Tshuva talks about a case where it's dangerous to make, or when the rabbis are saying it's dangerous to make aliyah because you're taking a sea voyage, let's say, and it's very dangerous. There's pirates. It's dangerous, especially for children. Children get sick on the open seas. It might be dangerous for them. So then, would you still be able to force somebody to make aliyah against their will, or would that be a valid reason? Saying, I'm not making aliyah because the rabbi said it's dangerous. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but we're going to get we'll get the gist of it. He says here, okay. So let's say, we have the question, if somebody's arguing, I can't make aliyah with you because it's dangerous for the small children. He says, that's not a valid reason. That there's no particular danger greater for children than for adults. I mean, there's always an element of danger when you travel and when you move, when you go into a new place, there's always an element of danger. But this is not a valid reason. This is not an extreme danger. This is not a valid enough reason to not go. Because when it comes to the danger of drowning in the open seas, or being taken captives, or bandits on the way, pirates, so that's the same risk both for a child and for an adult. Okay? And if it's because of the difficulty of the journey itself, the ship is shaking and somebody can get sick from that. So children, it's actually easier for them to travel. Children are more flexible, it's easier for them. Okay? And now we get to the key part. So the rabbis who live on the islands of the sea have written that they see with their own eyes that young children have traveled to the ends of the earth. People have traveled with their young children, and everything's fine. So we have fact-based testimony, witnesses who say, rabbis who say, we saw with our own eyes, it's safe for children to travel. There's no particular danger. And therefore it seems that let's say the Basin, even if the Basin in their hometown makes Xera not to travel to Israel, because of the reasons that we mentioned. Let's say the Basin in your city says it's usher to make aliyah because it's too dangerous. You are allowed to rely on these rabbis from these islands who you never met. That their eyes saw just the opposite. They say, I saw it is safe to travel. The rabbi is the Basin in your city. We're not talking about a rabbi, we're talking about the Basin of your city says it's usher to travel to Israel, it's too dangerous. But we have rabbis who testify with their own eyes. We see it's perfectly safe. Then you were allowed to disregard the psak of your Basin because they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, because their eyes see the opposite. Because if somebody says we didn't see, that's not a proof. They have to see with their own eyes. Here's the key line. This is tantamount to a Basin ruling that the sun has set, and I'm looking right outside, and there's the sun. So the Basin cannot alter reality. Okay, if the Basin says something that is patently false, that you can see with your own eyes is untrue, you don't pay any attention to them. The Ein Torah, this is not a ruling. That doesn't count as a ruling. So a rabbi cannot paskin that a shot is safe and effective if it's not safe and effective. If you see with your own eyes and there's evidence that it's clearly not safe and effective, it hasn't been tested properly, we all know this already. There's so many reasons to conclude that it's not safe and effective. The rabbi cannot change that magically. Some people say even if the rabbi is wrong, you still take it because there's nothing bad can come from following the rules. Absolutely not true. This is like the rabbi saying the sun didn't set. I'm looking outside, the sun is right there. Okay? You don't listen to him. The im lacha shalola hamros pi basin kavod. If you're going to be concerned, well, I shouldn't go against the words of the basin because it's a kavod issue. We have to have respect for the rabbis. We don't want to treat them lightly. Okay? Kfar kasav hamabit. Siman Kufla Metesov, so the Mabit, another massive posek already wrote, to Ein Lachash Bazet, don't worry about that, okay? L'kibud Aveim HaChamur, that you don't have to worry for Kibud Aveim, which is more serious. You have to have more kavod for your parents than you have to have for the Beis Din, and if your parents are telling you that the sun is up and the sun is down, you don't listen to your parents when they're telling you something that's patently absurd, so you don't have to worry about that at all. Okay? And he brings in the case from Mikol Shekain Gidrei Beis Din. How much more so for worrying about the kavod of Beis Din? If you don't even have to worry about the kavod of your parents when they're telling you something that is patently false, you don't have to worry about the kavod of Beis Din either. Kfar Ishtamit Rabbi Zeir Me Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi the Boile Mesek L'Eretz Yisrael. And already Rabbi Zeir slipped away. He was hiding from his rabbi Rav Yehuda because he wanted to make Aliyah. At the Gemara at the end of Subas, that he wanted to make Aliyah, and Rav Yehuda wanted to paskin for him that you're not allowed to make Aliyah from Bavel to Israel, and Rabbi Zeir, of course, felt differently, so he was sort of hiding from his Rebbe because he didn't want to argue with him, didn't want to embarrass him, or whatever the case may be, but he didn't listen to his Rebbe and made Aliyah, and he is concluding here that was perfectly okay. He was perfectly okay. His Rebbe had his own reasons, but Rabbi Zeir did not have to listen to him. So you see, when it comes to personal choices, halacha, all kinds of things like that, if the rabbi is telling you something that you know is not correct or not right for you, you don't listen to him. So what do you do about the teaching that even if the rabbi tells you left is right and right is left, that you have to listen? So let's see what the Torah says. This is in Parsha Shoftim at the very beginning. That you should do according to the words that they tell you from that place that Hashem chooses, meaning the Sanhedrin Hagadol. You should guard to do like everything that they rule. According to the Torah that they rule for you, and according to the judgment that they tell you, you shall do. You should not deviate from the matter that they tell you, right or left. So this is the part that they will quote, those last few words, not deviate. They don't tell you what comes earlier. And I wrote about this again in one of my articles on Shoftim. It says, Al pi ha-Torah asher yarucha, so the first place is follow the Torah that they rule for you, do what they tell you. Okay? But then it says in the next pasuk again, Al pi ha-Torah asher yarucha, says it a second time. It's totally redundant. They just told us, do according to the Torah that they rule for you. So I have my own chiddush, as it turns out that I was not the first one to come up with this idea. You only follow the Torah that they rule for you when it is Al pi ha-Torah. Yet again, it has to be a valid Torah opinion. Like again, think about Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarfon, the classic poskim who may argue with one of the Rish, the Rif, the Rush, and the Rambam. They're all correct, right? But you can only do like one of them. So then you have to follow the process to determine what you should practically do. But they're all valid opinions. So when the Sanhedrin is, let's say, ruling, in this case we follow the Rif and we don't follow the Rambam, let's say, so then you follow the Sanhedrin in that case because they are ruling according to two valid opinions. And even if you think, well, the Rambam's totally right, it seems like what you're telling me is left and right, but you have to follow their ruling because it is a valid opinion, even if it seems like that was the wrong choice for them to make. But it is still within the boundaries of a proper ruling. It has to be al pi ha-Torah. It can't just be something that they're making up. If they're not educated about the issue, if they're taking bribes, if they haven't studied it properly, whether it's coming to a personal matter or a matter of Torah law, you don't listen. Okay? Two more sources. One is short and one is a little bit longer. This is a source somebody sent me a while ago. This is from the Avram David Mibotchich. I hope I didn't butcher the name. Okay, he says, Yesh gam kein mitzvah de lo sasur u mitzvah shel achri rabim lahato. So there is in fact a mitzvah of not deviating from their ruling and going after the rov. L'tzayes lahamora karai. Says it explicitly, to listen to one who's ruling appropriately. It has to be an appropriate, how do you know it's an appropriate ruling? God gave you something, use it. Study, ask around, ask more questions. It has to be an appropriate ruling. If it doesn't make sense, ask more questions. Probe further. That is your right, that is your chiyuv. You must do this. Then the supa in Barak Hogan, if you are unsure if you ruled properly, mutal lachar, it is incumbent upon you to investigate. Bein gedolim ba'am b'nei Yisrael. Go to the greatest of the Jews, go to people who are scholarly, and ask around. Okay? Search out for more knowledge. Until it becomes clear to you, until it becomes known to you what the proper ruling is, and then you must listen. So it is an obligation upon you. If the ruling doesn't seem to make sense or it's in doubt, you have to keep on learning, keep on asking around until it becomes clear to you what the proper ruling is. This is very wide-reaching implications. Okay, final source is from Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Zichichov. Okay? He says, first of all, opinion, nasatim and nasatim amuna. When it comes to matters of dealing in trust, it's very interesting that he brings that in, because this is all ultimately coming down to trust. Shlotia Achi pesi yam l'chol davar. That you, my brother, shouldn't be a fool who trusts anybody. Just trust whatever the rabbi says. Afilu l'rav hamuvak u'mefursam. Even if it's your personal rabbi who is a famous rabbi. Afilu yadome harav u'malach Hashem tzvakos. Even if your rabbi seems like an angel of God himself. Lo tamin l'shum uvda u'maisim l'nag shum diktik maisim. You should not trust any action that he takes to just copy what he does, to mindlessly copy what he does. You see very often when a Rosh Yeshiva somewhere has a particular, funky hairstyle, a long pay, or whatever, you find the students often like they'll grow the beard the same way, or wear the hat the same way. They're mimicking the rabbi. He says, this is foolish. It doesn't mean the rabbi's wrong to do it, but you're wrong to do it, because you don't know why he's doing it. It might not be the right thing for you. Okay? You should not just do anything he does. Okay? Until you examine for yourself every action that you see your rabbi doing. You don't just be a copycat. Until you examine very carefully, okay, for the reason and the root for why the rabbi took this action or did this movement. It's a parenthetical comment which I'm going to skip. Even if it seems like he's doing the right thing in your eyes, and it gives you some kind of benefit or pleasure, because you love your Rebbe so much, so you want to be like him and you like everything he does, so you're a little bit blinded as well. It says in the Sefer Noam Elimelech in Parshas Kedoshim, Shadavar kanin pesel chas v'shalom. It is like you're making an idol out of your Rebbe. That is not the relationship that we have with our Rebbe, that I want to be exactly like him, I want to dress like him, and talk like him, and look like him, and do everything he does. That is an idolatrous relationship. Ratzalomar means to say, Lasos tenua, dugmas tenuas rabcha, to your mannerisms and your movements should be a mirror image of what your Rebbe does. That is a form of idolatry. This is well known among the Hasidim and men of action. Hasidim means pious people, not Hasidim in the street. But if you investigate the matter, you study it, and you see that this is really a good, valid Torah reason why he's doing it, and it makes sense for you, then you should learn, of course, you should see a rabbi as a role model, and learn from his actions, not just from his teachings, from his actions, but you have to study it first. You have to examine it first and see that it makes sense. Specifically, especially if you see the rabbi doing something that seems to go against the Torah. For example, let's say he's coming to davening late, he's davening past the accepted time, or he's changing from any of the other times that are already known to us to be the right thing to do. Even if he's eating at improper hours for a Talmud Chacham, he's doing something that seems a little bit strange. Even if the Rav is a tzaddik and he's famous, so we assume he must be very holy. There's a Capitalistic reason, right? Lo tavar ato divrei Torah divrei Chacham chas v'shalom. You should, God forbid, that you should go against the words of the Torah, the words of the Chacham. The rabbi is doing whatever he's doing. Maybe he has a good reason, maybe he doesn't. But how could you go against the Torah? You know better. The Torah says this. The rabbi is doing whatever he's doing. Doesn't mean I follow him. Even for one single mannerism or motion that he does, you don't go against the Torah. So why is the Rav doing this? Maybe it is in fact the wrong thing to do, but there's a particular emergency. This is a one-time exception that he has to do it. Right? There's certain cases where we have to, for a one-time thing, go against the Torah. Maybe he has a reason. Maybe it's a health reason. Maybe he's just not allowed to eat at that certain hour. But you can't paskin based on what you saw him do that this is the right thing for everybody to do. So you have to judge him favorably that probably he has a good reason, a personal reason, and he's probably doing the right thing because generally speaking he is a big tzaddik. That you shouldn't assume, God forbid, that he's doing the wrong thing, but you're not allowed to copy him. But you should not follow his actions which are going against the Torah until you engage with him and fully understand why he's doing it. You have to ask the rabbi, I see you doing something, and here I know the Torah says this, can you please explain it to me? And either he gives you a good answer or he doesn't, but you cannot take any actions based on what he does until you clarify it. When he gives you a reason according to the Torah, and he explains it to you, and again, key words, his words enter your ears, it makes sense to you, you don't just give him a blank check. After you investigate the matter, it's incumbent upon you to investigate it, and you have to be satisfied with the answer that you hear. And then you can trust that he's doing the right thing. Aside from this, you should not believe he's doing the meaning. You don't assume he's doing the wrong thing. You certainly don't paskin anything from it. You don't change your behavior based on that. Even if he tells you that Eliyahu Hanavi told him that he should do this, don't listen to him, don't trust him. If it's going against the Torah. They already said it. If Eliyahu Hanavi comes and says something that goes against the halacha, we don't listen to Eliyahu Hanavi. Lo basha mayimhi. The Torah is here, and a judge can only rule according to what he sees, as we've seen several times. Even if he's going against a mere takana of the chachamim, we still don't listen to him. He goes on and says that all the people who claim that Eliyahu Hanavi spoke to them, massive poskim, that they never said anything that goes against the Talmud, and therefore be very careful about somebody who comes along saying, God told me, Eliyahu Hanavi told me, I have Ruach HaKodesh, I have Das Torah, I have a straight line to Hashem. That's not how we paskin shilas. One more paragraph, and midevarim elu kal v'chomer. From these things, we learn kal v'chomer. How much more so? Shlo tamin l'rav asher einu musmach me'rav muvhak. Rav me'rav ad rav shekibo me'eliyahu musmach me'chach me'ador rubam kukum tzadikim l'odor l'tam. You certainly do not trust a rabbi who's making such a statement unless he's a Rabbi Mubak who goes all the way up the chain back to Moshe Rabbeinu. It can't just be a rabbi who seems very pious and holy making things up. If he's going to give you some information, he has to have it on very, very good authority going back to Har Sinai. This is also, and if not for this, even if the Rav tells you something that seems like prophecy and Ruach HaKodesh, God spoke to me, I had an inspiration, do not believe him. Imagine, who knows what Ruach this is? He says it's Ruach HaKodesh. Maybe it's a Ruach Shtus. Maybe it's a shade. Who knows what? The rabbi says the Spirit told me. Who knows that it's really Ruach HaKodesh? Maybe it's a Ruach Tumah, for all you know. Okay. He says at the end, skipping to the end, he says, "V'nemar al pi Torah asher yarucha." That's why I brought this in, because of the pasuk. Right, you follow the Torah that He rules for you. Hagam she'en lecha el shofet shel yemech. Even though you have to follow the judges in your days, the judges that we have today are not as great as the judges that we had in previous times. Tzarich levar lecha al pi Torah davka. Okay, we don't just follow the rov. We don't just do right and left, das Torah. It has to be following the actual. He has to rule according to the Torah. He gives you a Torah. Torah means a ruling. He's giving you Torah. He's giving you, but it has to be al pi haTorah. Das Torah must follow Torah. It must have das. It must make sense. You can't paskin that the sun set when it didn't set. It has to be das. It has to be logical. It has to make sense. And it has to be Torah. So if there's no das and there's no Torah, there's no das Torah. There's nothing. Okay? And he says the same thing similarly comes in the Rambam and Hilchos Melachim Simonei Melech HaMashiach. So that, basically, bottom line is that the only authority a rabbi has is the one that we give him. Meaning, if you have a beis din in your town, then the townspeople presumably have given authority to the beis din to set the minhag, right? That they will be the source. If you have a court case to go to, if you go to them, all right, you have two sides and either one could be right, so they have to pass between. Then you have to follow what they say. If you go to a posek and you have a shaila and there's two possible sides or two possible angles and they're both valid Torah opinions, but you don't know which one to pick, then you have to follow the psak. You have given him the authority by asking him the shaila, and of course you are entitled to question his reasoning if it doesn't make sense to examine it further. But if you give a rabbi a shaila and he gives you a valid Torah opinion and he justifies it, so then you're not allowed to go shopping around. I'll give you a good story about this. When I was a bacher, my first year learning in Israel, the big shaila at the time was how many days of Yom Tov should the people from Chutz La'aretz keep? 1 day, 2 days, what they call a day and a half, right? Nobody knew what to do. So they asked the posek there, Rav Beilinson was a posek from Telstone. He was the Rosh Kolo there. And very fascinating. Some people he told to keep 1 day, some people he told to keep 2 days. I don't know if he told anybody to keep a day and a half, but he didn't give the same sock to the same shaila to different people. Why? I learned a very, very important lesson. He could kind of tell, he would get to know the person a little bit, or see the way in which he asked the question, or what answer the person was hoping for, and he would give him an answer that he thought was suitable for that particular person. For this person, he should keep 2 days. This person, 1 day is a better option. What he personally felt is the best thing to do, I don't know, probably felt to that. He told me to keep 2 days. Okay? But some people knew that was not the right psak for them. So both have poskim that you can lean on, and a real posek gets to know the person asking him the question, and then he gives a psak that fits the person. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So you have to give once he tells you to keep 1 day or 2 days, then you should listen, because both approaches are valid. They have what to stand on, and you're going to a qualified posek, so then you should listen to him. But if it's something that doesn't make any sense, if he says keep 3 days or 4 days or 10 days, it doesn't make any sense, so you don't listen to him, obviously. What if it's not a matter of Jewish law, but it's a personal question, advice and guidance? So then I would say, look, it really depends. I would say under no circumstances are you obligated to follow what he says, because it's your choice. Ultimately, you have to live with the consequences of that. But that would vary. Like, let's say I'm going to the Chavetz Chaim about a personal matter. I'm not obligated to listen to the Chavetz Chaim, but it would be very hard for me to not listen to him because I know I'm talking to a very saintly person who probably has Ruach HaKodesh or something very, very close to it. So it would be very hard for me not to listen to him unless it absolutely made no sense, which is unlikely that he would ever say such a thing. So you have to give more credit to certain people, just like in any area of your life. If you're looking for business advice, you're going to a business expert, or you're looking for advice in any area of life, if you go to somebody who clearly is an expert in that field, you're not obligated to listen to him, but you'd be less likely to throw out his opinion because he knows what he's talking about, especially if he's taking the time to get to know you and the particular variables in your case. It would be a good idea to listen to what he says, but you're certainly not obligated. You certainly have the privilege of shopping around for different opinions, hearing different sides of the matter. So if you're asking a rabbi for a personal matter, you're not obligated. If the rabbi is an extremely holy man, and he knows what he's talking about, and he took the time to get to know you well, and he respects you and where you're coming from, and he's tailoring the psak for your particular needs, and it's based on the Torah, then you're not obligated, but it would be a very good idea to listen because it's probably good advice. If it's a matter of Jewish law, then in some cases you're obligated. If it's a valid Torah opinion, and you're giving him the authority to rule for you, again, the Rebbe cannot knock on your door and say, you must take a shot or you must do something. They don't have the authority. You didn't ask them the Shiloh. But if you ask them the Shiloh, and they give you an answer, and it's a valid Torah opinion, then generally speaking, you are obligated to follow that opinion. If it makes no sense, then you don't listen. And we see in all cases, somebody giving a psak can only rule according to what he sees. He has to know what he's talking about, and it has to make sense to him. And the person who is on the receiving end of the psak, it has to make sense to him as well. We don't have a concept. The rabbi said, case closed. So that's the end of the presentation. Any questions? I'm happy to. Yeah.
So let's